Each of us has our own unique thoughts about the scariest things in the world. It is not easy to trust what we feel and experience when it comes to scaring ourselves, but there are some common fears or horror stories that have become widely known throughout humanity. Sometimes a dark corner can be more frightening than a flickering light bulb. In this article, we will explore some scariest things in the world. This list does not pretend to be definitive or complete. It is a selection of scariest things that have come up for me over time as I recall my own experiences with horror and terror. Each scary thing on this list has its own story which you are invited to read about below. It is my hope that reading these stories might help someone else find peace by working through their fears, seeking out light where there seems only darkness, one terrifying moment at a time. Cemeteries and graveyards. We tend not to think too much on how scary cemeteries and graveyards are until something happens like Halloween night when you hear all the ghost stories come out around campfires or with scary movies. Some people are more superstitious about graveyards and cemeteries than others, but it is hard to deny that they're the scariest things in the world when you think of all the spirits wandering around after dark. Abandoned places. Some buildings seem to have an energy of their own. It's as if they are haunted by those who once lived there and loved it, but left in a hurry. So many scariest things about abandoned places is that we don't know why people left them behind. It is definitely one of the scariest things in the world. Abandoned houses can be especially scary because the scariest thing about abandoned houses might also be what happened inside them before they became deserted, or when someone new moves into one. Crocodile and other lethal drugs. This scariest thing in the world is not an object, but a drug. The scariest part about this drug though is that it has become popular among some people who are using it to get high and inject themselves with it, often unaware of how dangerous it really is. Crocodile can be made from codeine tablets mixed up with other substances like gasoline and paint thinner, which makes the scariest things about crocodile that there's no way for them to know what they're getting into when they use this deadly concoction. Crocodile is a drug which can be injected directly into the veins, causing severe damage to skin and other tissues. People who use crocodile are at high risk of lethal side effects such as death due to heart failure or stroke from blood clotting in an artery near their brain. They also have a very strong likelihood of contracting HIV/AIDS when sharing needles with others because it damages tissue so bad that contaminants may enter one's bloodstream through open wounds. This substance has been popularized by its reputation for being Russian magic, but anyone who knows anything about this dangerous narcotic fears it deeply, especially since there could never really be any magic involved. Gympie. The gympie is an Australian plant that has a sting so strong it can last for months. The scariest part about the plant, however, is that its poison will take effect no matter how much time passes after being stung. It is definitely one of the scariest things in the world. The gympie plant is one of the most deadly plants in Australia, and it's not just because its stinging hairs cause an exceedingly painful sensation. In fact, these dangerous little guys are found all throughout rainforest areas that loom over your head with their tall branches. Sometimes they can seem so beautiful to us, they might even make you want to stop for a picture or two. But be careful. They also happen to harbor hidden dangers like poisonous thorns on vines which get caught up into the low-hanging trees as well. There have been cases where people who got too close ended up being crushed underneath them when they snapped back quickly from being disturbed by wind gusts blowing through those same trees. Cursed objects. It is said that cursed objects have the power to infect people with an evil curse. The scariest thing about these types of curses, however, is that they can happen without the person who has been infected even knowing it. A so-called curse might be a spell or hex cast on something. For example, it could afflict someone by touch alone, like touching their clothes, by making direct eye contact with them and speaking words in foreign languages like Latin while gesturing at other items related to black magic, such as animal horns. There are also those cases where victims were told of how a curse would affect them when looking into another's eyes, and then actually having it take effect. Radioactive waste. As a result of nuclear testing in the 1940s and 50s, radioactive waste is still present today. The scariest part about this type of environmental pollution, however, is that it can take on various forms. It could be found as dust particles or invisible gases floating through air. But even when there are no traces to show for themselves, they're still capable of being dangerous. It is definitely one of the scariest things in the world. The scariest thing about these types of contaminated areas, which might also have been abandoned by humans, is that you just don't know how much radiation has built up over time, or what kind may exist at any given moment. Scientists say there's virtually zero risk from exposure to small doses like those we receive during normal daily activities, but prolonged exposure to large doses could cause illness or even death. The scariest part about these radioactive wastes is that they don't turn into harmless substances when exposed to air. Instead, they only become more dangerous as time passes. One example of this is the infamous Chernobyl disaster. Over 200 people became seriously ill after the disaster, and about 50 people died. We don't know the damage it's done to the environment yet, but we do know that many of these scariest things in this world are much more than just a passing fad. Biological weapons are scary because of how they're spread. The scariest part about these types of weapons is that the more people who die, the weaker our immune systems become as a result. This means there's an increased risk for diseases to take hold once we start coming into contact with them. There have been multiple cases of this happening in the past, and it's scariest because of how easily we can spread diseases. It is definitely one of the scariest things in the world. Additionally, they don't need to be as strong or powerful to cause a lot of damage. They have been used many times throughout history with great results. Box jellyfish are scariest because of how lethal they can be. These types of jellies have a toxin called chironix, which is about 50 times more powerful than cyanide, and it's also unique in that the venom doesn't react to any treatments we currently use. Their stingers, or their tentacles if you will, contain this potent toxin, and these critters live all over the world, so there's no way for humans to avoid them either. That said, box jellyfish aren't as common as other sea creatures, but when they show up at beaches in places like Australia or parts of Asia where people swim freely without protection, then scaring swimmers away becomes difficult. Brain-eating amoeba is scary because of how fatal they can be. These types of amoebas are found in many freshwater sources, and the scariest part is that a single drop could trigger an infection. It is definitely one of the scariest things in the world. The scariest thing about these critters is that there's no way to know if you've come into contact with one, since symptoms only develop after 24 hours have passed from when someone has been exposed, and by then, it might be too late for treatment. As such, this means we should all take as many precautions possible before coming into contact with water so our chances of getting infected become much lower. Big-sized insects are scariest because of how they can bite. There's a reason why we're scared of spiders, ants and roaches, but what makes them even scariest is how quickly these critters can cause pain or give us serious illnesses. Some people might not be afraid of bugs in general, but it doesn't change the fact that some types like mosquitoes carry diseases such as malaria and Zika, which you definitely want to avoid at all costs. For this reason alone, big-size insects deserve their spot on the list. Insects might also have smaller mouths than other animals, so there's more surface area for fluids to enter your body if bitten by one, so prevention becomes key when dealing with any animal disease carriers like these. The scariest part is that they can be found just about anywhere, so it's difficult to avoid them. Nuclear weapons are scary because of the damage they can cause. It is definitely one of the scariest things in the world. These types of bombs have changed everything we know about warfare, and it's scariest to think that these things could go off at any time. The world has been witness to the devastating effects of nuclear warfare and can see it happening again. Hiroshima was a prime example for those who want to know what might happen if they do not take care of their own safety. If there is one thing humans should be aware about weapons such as these, are that even when detonated miles away from them, radiation still affects you severely because its effect lasts longer than any other weapon known today. Haunted houses are scariest because of the unknown. We've all heard the stories and seen movies about haunted places that people just can't get out of their heads. The scariest thing about these locations is how there's no proof they're actually real or not, but we can never know for sure, which makes them so frightening to us. That said, some believe ghosts exist in these kinds of areas, which means it could be possible that on top being scared by what might happen next, you also have to worry if this particular location will cause harm to your body as well. It doesn't help when they try playing tricks on those who enter, either like making noises when nothing else is happening around there at nighttime, with the scariest part being that it's not like you'll know what the sound is coming from, so there won't be anything to help prepare yourself for when those moments happen. Meteoroids are the scariest things in the world in 2021 because of their unpredictability. These things fly through the air and can cause a lot more damage than we give credit for. The scariest thing is that they might not even be visible to us before it's too late to react or prepare, so our only hope would be if some people were able to warn you beforehand, but with how unpredictable these events tend to happen, there will never be enough time given in advance for preparation purposes. What makes them scariest now is how the world has become more aware of this type of event thanks to movies like Armageddon, which means meteorites could come at any moment without warning and no one being prepared afterward as well.